Hello, everyone. What is today? The 30th of May. And we are here live for, I don't know, third, fourth edition of Sock It To Me. And again, the mute on the other screen didn't work. So anyhow, I wanted to welcome everybody to the show. I have once again my favorite counterparts, Chris Roberts and Mike Pedrick. Hello, gents.
Hello.
So it's been a couple of weeks since we got together, and I feel like a lot has happened. But then again, it's cybersecurity. So when does not? You never say, yeah, it's been kind of slow in cybersecurity. There's never that. It's always, good Lord. And somebody throw water on my face and give me a vacation. So one of the things I wanted to start out with was a 0 day we published about in the last week or so about the QTS 0 day. I wanted to get your guys' thoughts on that because for somebody like me, I don't know what QNAP is. It's kind of a cool acronym, but I have no idea what it does and why it's important. And I don't think there's been a lot written about it. So can one of you jump in and tell us?
Go for it, Mike. You want to start that one?
Mikey, take it away.
Yeah, the first thing I want to put out there is that what strikes me as interesting about this particular announcement is that it isn't getting a lot of attention right now. It isn't getting a lot of activity out in the wild, so to speak. And I've been trying to wrap my mind around why I think that might be. In some cases, when a vulnerability or series of 0-day vulnerabilities don't get attention, it's because it's especially arduous or cumbersome to exploit that vulnerability. I don't get that impression with these vulnerabilities. So what I think part of it is that the QNAP systems or product structure, et cetera, these are not tremendously huge enterprise grade systems. These are, prosumer to small and medium-sized business space devices. And so it's not going to get the attention of the Fortune 500 organizations or leaders of those teams. However, big asterisk here. QNAP has a massive portion of the market share in the prosumer to small and mid-market space. And so there are a ton. I heard a number 80,000 plus devices out there in the wild that are affected by this particular set of 0-day vulnerabilities. So we shouldn't sleep on this, right? This is big. This is a pretty big deal for especially those organizations that may not be aware of this because they're not mainlining, feeds like what we have at Nuspire. So, very important.
They should be.
Yeah, they should definitely be mainlining Nuspire. Yep. Get
right
your
there.
nose in there, snort. Yeah.
Whatever works. The best. Yeah. Whatever vehicle. Chris, tell me about it. I know you were looking up some stuff and it was pretty interesting.
Yeah, we were taking a look because, again, Francie, to your point, a lot of people have kind of heard of QNAP. It's been thrown around and, we've talked a little bit about it on and off for the last couple of years. But nobody's actually, Mike and I and various other people, nobody, I think, realizes maybe let's just, go out and buy a network-attached storage device. And especially small and medium businesses, they're not going to go out and get the Zscalers. They're not going to go out and get all the other crazy large stuff that's out there. They might not even go out and get a box of disks from whoever's providing them as service providers if they're not using just a full cloud deployment. But they are going to go out. Perfect example here. I got a lab space here at the house. I have somewhere in the region of about 350, 400 terabytes worth of storage in various different places, shall we say, of which a couple of hundred terabytes is here. And I don't have the QNAP devices. I've got something a little bit, I've got robust stuff. But if I didn't, I'd be down at, the local Micro Center, Best Buy, whoever. I was going to say Fry's, but Fry's went out, didn't they?
Gone.
I know. I liked Fry's. You could walk in there looking for hard drives and walk out with like an air fryer, or also you could walk out there with a barbecue, for crying out loud. Anyway, we lament Fry's. So the thing is with QNAP is, again, to Mike's point, you're looking at, hey, I need a NAS device. I'm 5,000 or below price-wise. I need a box of disks to store backup stuff on. And you'll go find one of these things because they're nice, they're good, they're reliable, they work. But this is now the fourth major oops we've had from them in the last couple of years. We had one in '01, we had one in '03, a pretty nasty one, and now we've had two this year so far. And they've got, to Mike's point, they've got what, 20, 24, 23, 25% of that market share. So there's a lot of companies out there which are at potential risk.
Yeah. And it's interesting. How prolific a product or software can be, and you've never really, nobody's talking about it, but maybe that's kind of scary actually, because there are a lot of companies that could be affected by it, and given that it's smaller, like mid-sized small business, do a lot of them pay attention to that?
No, they're reliant on, consulting organizations, small MSPs, et cetera, to have this information. And I
Yeah.
want to be judicious about how I say this. The degree of maturity varies by organization,
Sure.
right? Some organizations are going to have very robust asset inventory and lifecycle management processes, and others, frankly, are not, right? So they may never know about this vulnerability. But I also want to say, and I want to be crystal clear on this, a vulnerability is not synonymous with compromise.
Right.
We as an industry have to grapple with that. We talk about zero-day vulnerabilities as though it's the end of the world. And it sells advertising time and it gets people's eyeballs on things. And to the extent that having that alarmist attitude brings attention to the industry, awesome sauce. Can't be beat, right? But it is clickbait because, again, a vulnerability is not an immediate compromise. If I open the front door to my home, I'm instantly significantly more vulnerable to somebody invading my house. But it's not as though I'm pushing the door open against a tide of zombies or something, right? That's just not the thing. On a long enough timeline, yeah, that happens. But otherwise, I can open up my door and I'm probably fine for at least several hours. So, not the same.
That's a good point, because when we put out threat briefs, we make a distinction between, it hasn't been exploited or it's actively being exploited right now. And that's the key. It's the exploitation of the vulnerability, not necessarily the vulnerability itself. It exists. There's patches, patch it definitely. But it doesn't mean that people are, in your network doing things right away. Go ahead, Chris.
This brings up to Mike, to both of your points. This brings up something interesting, which is where we talk about risk and probability.
Mm-hmm.
And that's, it's one of those things. Whenever somebody comes in and does an assessment or a penetration test or a red team, or comes in and gives you a report, unfortunately, all too often, it is not done in the context of the organization you're working with. It's not done in the context of a good data model. It's not always necessarily done in the context of something anybody in leadership can understand. Unfortunately, in a lot of cases, you get handed this darn great big thick report of which a third of it's red, a third of it's orange, and a third of it's light green. And you're sitting there and you're like, well, I've got all these hundreds of high-risk vulnerabilities. Well, they're on 4 machines. It's not in service. It doesn't have any data on it. It's on its own separated network LAN, blah, 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 and 6 other mitigating controls. Yeah, it's a problem. It's the red-headed stepchild, and if we turn it off, the entire lights on the eastern seaboard go wrong. But we've done everything we can to mitigate. Oh, it doesn't matter. It's red. It's bad. It's bad. It's bad. Mm-hmm. Well, the world is ending, and we're not good at saying, "Hey, that's a risky blasted system over there." However, the probability of somebody getting in is ridiculously low because you've got all these mitigating controls. Therefore, leave it be, and if it ever burps, farts, or breaks wind, we know what we've got to do with it.
Well, you'll smell it, so you're like, all right.
Exactly, yeah, the burning smell of cap diodes going off.
It's a good point, because I feel like, it is kind of a fear-based, like there's just so much alarms, everybody freak out. And I think sometimes folks might feel like, well, what's the point? If everything is on fire, then is there even a point to trying to address things? But it's not that way. And I feel like sometimes people get in that cycle of being really negative around the atmosphere, and like, there's a lot of things we can do, and that's why we do what we do, right? What do you think, Mike?
This is what go on, sorry.
Oh, go ahead.
This is what we were talking about a little bit off camera, earlier on, was we know that Microsoft's got its patch whatever day, and Apple's got its patch day, and Android has, and we've all got our patch, and we're used to patching the software. we should be, let me rephrase this, we should be used to patching the software on a regular periodic basis, depending upon risks and probabilities. But what we're not used to is patching the hardware side of it. We're not used to patching the technology that's around us. The computer monitor I'm running has software running on it. Last time I touched the patch on that was, the device is behind. Let's talk about printers. How often are those in our corporate environments the most neglected things known to humankind?
Yeah.
Let alone the security cameras that are probably also wired into the regular network. We're not good at taking a step back and patching those. So when something like the QNAP patch or others come along that are hardware related, system related, we've got blinders on. Oh, it's not Microsoft, it's not iOS, it's not Linux. We don't need to worry about it. And not quite the case.
Yeah.
If I can, Francie, you touched on something that I think is it's a good tee up for a subject. That nihilism, right?
Yes.
That defeatism that says, well, God, if I'm just going to get if I'm going to get compromised, or I'm going to have this vulnerability anyway, how much effort should I put in? And I think a lot of folks don't realize that a little effort goes a long way. And we all recognize inherently that risk never reaches zero, but we still do things like lock our doors at night or put snow tires on our cars, et cetera, right? And it's the little things that don't eliminate the risk, but reduce the risk of an adverse event occurring. Yeah. And I think that it comes, one of the things that I want to use that again as a springboard on is we don't do a super good job of securing, using data-centric security practices. Here's what I mean by this. When we talk, for example, about scope and scale for deploying a SIEM solution, and we talk about that quite a bit. We talk about, I want to get data from a firewall. I want to get data from a switch. I want to get data from every piece of hardware or platform that I can touch so I can ingest those logs and correlate that information, right? Well, I started thinking about this the other day. I thought, well, if we really explore this, where does all the data live, right? I'm not doing an asset inventory, a hardware asset inventory, and then deciding I want information from that hardware. I would rather have an inventory of where does my data go and how do I get information from that? And I don't care if it's mine in a closet or it's in the public cloud or it's in somebody else's environment altogether, right? And yes, I am saying that third-party vendors, if my data is in your systems, I want my SIEM to get that information from your device. Let's have that conversation, right? So I'm using that as to say this. One of the topics that we want to address today is that Nissan ransomware attack, right?
Yes.
It compromised social security numbers of thousands of former and current employees. And my question becomes, why is that information still there? Why is that information still available? I get it for current employees, but for former employees, isn't there a sanitization or an anonymization process that could have been executed to protect that information that they're no longer entitled to?
Okay, so I'll devil's advocate. I'll pull you up on that one because I mean this is the thing. I mean you and I both know data handling, data classification, and standards that are part of most of the controls out there, frameworks that we should or shouldn't be adhering to these days. Yes. Turn around and say, thou shalt not hold certain data after X amount of time. And I would love to know, I haven't looked at the news on this one, I would love to know if somewhere along the lines that particular organization put a tick in the box going, oh, absolutely, we get rid of this data after a certain period of time. And it's still now found egg upon its face.
I think it's opposing forces, right? So I often have to counsel folks on this that you want to keep data, especially sensitive data or in scope for regulatory pressures data. You want to keep it for exactly as long as you have to and not 1 second longer, right?
Yeah.
Right.
Because the longer you keep information, you lose the predictability of outcome in legal proceedings. And so, it has a cost associated with the real estate, the maintenance of that data, and so on, right? And so I think that, again, these are perpendicular forces that I have to keep this information for 6 years, 7 years, whatever. Imagine being an architectural firm that has to keep building information for the reasonable life cycle of the building. That's decades, right? And so those IT teams have to make sure that that information has survivability. So again, my issue isn't necessarily with them keeping the data. My issue is with that data being intact and actionable in its original state beyond its usable life cycle. So I'm going to say this and it's going to sound awfully incendiary. I'm sort of over having the conversation about protecting data. I want to start having conversations about how do we get rid of data.
Mm-hmm.
That's not useful anymore, that you don't need to use. Yeah.
Exactly.
What I'm curious about, because I think when I read that article, it happened in November. And then it just came out, we are in May.
Mm-hmm.
Why? What happened? That seems really weird to me. Is that not? I think they notified clients or about it, but it just seems like such a long time before we're actually seeing news on it. And given like the disclosure rules, which we're going to talk about in a second, I thought that there was some strict regulations around that. Maybe I'm misreading it though.
You're right. There are strict regulations. You're absolutely right. There are strict regulations. There should. There are if they're enforced, if it's the right type of data and it's the right state and somebody's done an investigation and here's the challenge. Rather than doing what's right by the people and by the people's stuff that you've lost, companies do what's right for the company. They treat the company as an entity and try to protect the living heck out of the company, because guess what? A company is an entity. So you have a whole bunch of lawyers arguing with the likes of Mike and I in most engagements. Mike and I are sitting there going, hey, we know that the horse has left the building. We're absolutely, it's gone. It's out there. And by the way, it's probably had kids and it's on its way to the glue factory at this point in time. And the lawyers are like, well, we don't actually have proof that it's actually left the building. We're not entirely sure. We haven't seen it for sale on Doggo. We can only certainly see this amount of traffic going on the firewall. And it's only 5% above average for the amount of traffic we would normally see. And blah, 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 blah. So you end up with this back and forth and back and forth and back and forth. And it's frustrating as all heck.
Well, as well as it's got to be enough of a story, right? So if a breach happens, and I'm not calling anybody out by name, mostly because I can't remember specifically the entity, because there's been so many examples of this, right? When it first hits the news cycle and the organization issues a press release that says, hey, we have no evidence to suggest that consumer data or sensitive data was leaked, right? Very artful response, probably accurate. We have no evidence thereof. Okay, cool. That is not the same as it didn't happen. It just means you don't have anything to show for it, right? But then after the investigation is done, or after a third party comes in and does an investigation, now we find out that, Chris, help me out. What was the example recently where there was a major breach and the organization said, oh, it was just a couple of records, and then 3 months later we find out.
Yes.
It was Okta.
It was Okta, yeah.
Look at that. Look at my brain actually working today with the headache.
Thank you, Francie. That was perfect. Yeah. Yeah, turns out, no, you all were right. It was every single.
It was a million. It was like. And here's the thing that I really. So we were talking about Microsoft's Patch Tuesday. In this last one, they had 2 zero-day vulnerabilities that I believe are being actively exploited, but they say that. So it's like they're saying, yeah, this is happening. It's not like they're trying to hide it. And I think by having a regular cadence, they're almost normalizing the idea that, yeah, this is going to happen. And here are the things you can do to, mitigate or, protect yourself from it.
When you think about it that way, what ends up happening, let's just say my organization gets breached. Mike and the team come in and go, oh, yeah. And then you've got to backtrack into that breach and go, how did it happen? What do we know? What are we missing? Were we able to capture enough code or enough of the smoking gun? And if we did, how does it compare and contrast to anything else that's been happening? At which point you're like, yeah, this is a new beastie and here's what we can, but that takes time.
Yeah. Okay.
It's a ridiculous ton of effort. And meanwhile, Microsoft and Cisco and everybody else is sitting there like this going, hey, was it us? Was it us? Did they come in our way? Did that? And all of a sudden you go, well, actually, yeah, it came in through A, B, and C. Well, that A, B, and C could be sitting on the cloud. It could be sitting on a NAS. It could be sitting on a desktop. I mean, investigating this and the DFIR, the forensic and incident response stuff on this is hugely specialized. And again, this goes back to something we've talked about. If you don't bring the right company in right off the bat, if I'm sitting there going, well, I'm going to penny pinch, I'm just going to pick up the A to Z and pick up the first company that's out there. And you get Fred Bloggs' Incorporated Forensics, and he turns up in his old minivan and a freaking, something with a screwdriver in it. You be screwed. And you're not going to know until they've unfortunately tampered with everything, gotten everything, probably messed half of it up and along the way, and then you bring in somebody else who actually knows what the heck they're doing, us, And then we sit down and go, well, we've got to untangle this, redo this, and then, by the way, yeah, now we see a problem. Then you got to go to Microsoft and go, hey, we see a problem. Microsoft's like, oh, we're not sure about this one. Then they go through all of their cycles, and then we go back and forwards. And then eventually, like, well, yes, it probably is a problem. At which point, 3, 6, 9 months have passed or whatever it might be. It's the process for disclosure is horrendous, potentially.
And that's helpful for people like me to understand, because at first it seems like kind of shady, like this happened all this long ago and now I'm just hearing about it. But what you're saying is there's a lot of stuff that happens behind the scenes to validate what's happening, who's affected, all of that stuff. That makes sense.
There's a lot of, it's to Mike's point. This is one of those things where we as an industry have cried wolf more times than we can shake a stick at. So more, kind of like hiring people. Nobody likes to be the person that goes, well, yes, I recommend this person for hire. They want 6 or 7 or 8 other people on that interview schedule, so they can all go, well, we hired them, and 6 months later they go, well, we all made the wrong choice. It's the same thing to some degree. There's so many checks and balances in ways, some for absolutely ridiculously good reasons, and others could be streamlined.
Sure. Well, Mike, you were going to say something.
Oh, no, I was just going to say it's also worth mentioning that some stories just don't get traction.
Yeah.
Some folks just don't care about certain breaches, right?
Mm-hmm.
If it doesn't hit the right people, or it's not publicized in the right way, or get the attention of certain personalities, it just slips into the water without a ripple.
It's a good point. And we also have to remember that the landscape for reporting and journalism has changed dramatically, and you don't have one person per beat to cover everything anymore, alas. So they do have to pick and choose and prioritize, what things are on the most fire? Like what are the things that, will really get those clicks? But speaking of, reporting and all of that, so there was an article that Dark Reading put out around the struggles for CISOs to comply with the SEC disclosure rule. And so, are we surprised? I feel like, duh.
Yeah, no, I don't know that we're surprised. And gosh, I'm going to become the curmudgeon. I'm going to become the pessimist.
I love it. You be the angry one.
I'm the Lewis Black.
I'm going to screenshot that.
So I think what I want to say here is that I love the increased scrutiny. I love the call for additional documentation. I like the pressure on organizations here. Some of it I think is sort of paradoxical. The notion of coming down on organizations for taking incident response communications offline, right? That is a very real tactic. That is a very real thing that organizations should be doing. And thanks to the SEC, they can get busted for doing so, because now that information isn't in the same stream of archival data that the rest of their information is on, right? So I have to counsel clients to say, yes, you absolutely should take your communications, your tactical communications offline, but take it somewhere else that is similarly tracked and could similarly be searched later, right? That feels like it defeats the purpose of going out of band there. So at any rate, where I'm going with this is I love the increased scrutiny, but I want to put my flag in the ground right here and say that it will get circumvented. The requirements will get relaxed. There will be folks who will find an artful way for meeting the minimum requirements, and then no further. And we'll continue to have breaches, ever more creative breaches, until people take this as a priority, not as a box-ticking exercise.
Yeah, I hear that. I think one of the things that they said in the article was that CISOs can use tabletop exercises to help companies create the right process for determining materiality and to collect the evidence needed to sign off on a disclosure within the 4-day window. And I thought that was interesting, because we've been talking about tabletops a lot, and I will get into a webinar we have coming up right around that, but they are super helpful for these kind of things. Figuring out, okay, what is this, something material that needs to be like reported right away, or is this just a little fluke that we don't need to really worry about? But before we jump into that, because I know we're getting short on time, Mike brought up an Apple Photos situation that he wanted to throw in. So, Mike, why don't you take it away and tell us what's going on with Apple?
Yeah, let me give you sort of the genesis of this. And I think that this is another instance of a thing that probably slid under the radar for the vast majority of people, weren't aware of it, et cetera. But a couple of folks started to notice that they had photos reappearing in their Photos app on their iPhones and their iPads that had been deleted long ago. And it opened up a question around what is happening back at home base that this information is suddenly available again.
Yeah.
And it wouldn't have gotten so much attention if it was, I deleted it yesterday and now it's back. This was very old data that was just resurrected, unearthed from the ground.
Like zombies.
Yeah, exactly.
You're gonna shoot it in the head. Duh.
Right. And so Apple's response was, "Oh, that's our bad. We're going to issue a patch to iOS." And they did. They just issued an iOS patch, and what was deleted went away again, right? But that started to lead to questions. Like, what does the word delete mean if it doesn't mean gone, right?
Like, where is this?
Exactly. And how far back does this go? Now, Apple was quick to point out that this isn't an issue at home base, because of course it isn't. It would be so much more embarrassing if it was, right? This is a database corruption issue at the actual device, that the device was still holding on to photos as opposed to deleting them. It's like the old idea. This is less and less relevant today, but it's like the old idea of magnetic disks, that when you hit delete on a file, it isn't that the file like ceases to exist. It's that the file table forgets where the myriad pieces are, right? And so Apple's response here is just to basically say that, well, your device tried to delete it, right? Told you it was gone, but it was still somewhere resident in storage on that particular device, and we did something that pulled it back up to the surface. From a technologist perspective, I sort of buy that. I think I can see how that would be a thing. But the privacy advocate in me is going, nope, you're going to have to do way the hell better than that. I need a much more robust explanation.
I'm a crime fanatic, not committing them, just learning about them, watching. I mean,
whatever you do in your spare time is entirely up to you.
But I feel like there's always those people who have like their cell phone communications and stuff, and they try to delete, and they always find that stuff, even though they thought it was deleted. So this doesn't necessarily surprise me a ton, but when we're talking about stuff that's really, really old, that's interesting. And it's like, where has it been? Like, what's it doing? Just sitting there?
I mean, it's like Mike said. I mean, if you think about it, think about the hard drives in these devices. We have, terabyte drives in our own individual devices these days. Rarely, if ever, will you fill that up. Yet, exactly to Mike's point, images, pictures, text messages, snaps, locations, all that stuff is stuck in there. And yeah, the header table for where it is gone, but it's still there. I mean, that's why forensics works so effectively and so efficiently so often. Now, to Mike's point, so let's play let's play this out for a second. My Apple phone all of a sudden finds another 100 photos. It's going to go to the cloud and go, hey, because all my photos are synced with the cloud, which are also synced with 6 other devices. Hey, I got these pictures. And the cloud goes, yeah, I got those ones too. And so do my other devices. And all of a sudden they pop up. They don't disappear. They pop back up again. So the question thus becomes one is exactly as Mike is alluding to is do our Apple-based overlords actually delete things, or are they just hiding them from us?
And like, is it a sectioned off piece of storage in the device that it goes to? Like, or is it?
No, because I've taken enough Apple devices in my time in the forensics and other devices as well. It literally is the header information. Here's the best way of looking at it. Take a book and rip out the index.
Okay.
The book's still there. You can actually read the book. You can go to a specific chapter, but if you want to know what chapter you're going to or where in the book it is, so rip out the index and rip out the table of content. That's basically what you're left with.
Okay. Oh, that is so interesting. Well,
Yeah.
interesting topic. Love it. I know we're short on time. I do want to say, so we were talking about tabletop exercises. We last week we did a simulation tabletop exercise, and what we're going to be doing next week on the 6th is the continuation part 2, where we get into the long-term recovery and things you can do, processes, policies, all that fun stuff. So if you haven't signed up, please do. I think we will be posting in the chat the link to that. And then we also did a checklist. So, and you can download that as well. So an incident response checklist, that's just something you can look at quickly and know where to start. Cause I think that's sometimes challenging, is, oh my God, there's so much going on all at once. Where do I start? Two last things. So we are going to be we're not going to be here in 2 weeks because for those of us who are in Denver and even those who aren't, we have RMISC, that conference that week. So we had actually toyed with maybe doing a live broadcast, but then we're like, might be kind of tough. Sometimes bandwidth issues, the Wi-Fi is not great. So we're just going to push it to the 18th. And then we're going to do another show the week right after that. As well. So the 18th and I believe the 25th. We have those dates they're already posted. So make sure you sign up for that. Is there anything else you gents would like to close out with?
I'm going to close up with one thing. We're back on the data. Many, many years ago, we used to have a policy, which is thou shalt delete thou's email or thou's PST file after 3, 6, 9, 12 months, or you'd have an automated thing. We keep talking about the proliferation of data. I would love to know how many people still have their emails from when they first started at the company, or last year's, or 2 years, or 3 years ago. You want to talk about a data-rich mining environment? Welcome to email hell.
Well, on that note, sleep well, everyone. And yeah, we will see you all on the 18th. We really appreciate you all joining us. Have a good one.
Take care.